What exactly does a co-executive producer on Blade Runner do?
Well, he does something that I would never want to do again. Let me put it that way.
I was quit when I come in here, Brian. I'm twice as quit now.
But it was one of those films that could eat up money like, a vacuum cleaner takes up the dirt.
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto.
Of the nice things that were written, I only remember one cynical reviewer saying it was a fascinating failure.
You were made as well as we could make you, but not to last.
Blade Runner is a movie you could watch 8 or 9 times and still see something new.
It was the last great breakthrough in science fiction filmmaking. Not the most recent, the last one probably that ever will be. I saw Blade Runner first, and then I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is a great title, but I can see why they changed it for the film. And the irony was that when I started reading Dick, I think, and most people when they started reading Philip K. Dick before the era of Blade Runner, never saw how his visions could be made in film.
A film of anything written by Philip K. Dick is always the filmmaker's vision because his stories really are sort of the seed of an idea, and he does not fill in the visual blanks whatsoever. But what he does is provide a sort of a jumping off point that's fantastic.
The plots are always changed, twisted, the emphasis is changed. You can recognize the elements. Rick Deckard as a character is in both Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Blade Runner. You can recognize the elements, but they're given usually a completely different spin in the films.
Will you help us?
I can't.
We need you, Sebastian. You're our best and only friend.
I get apprehensive when people talk about Blade Runner because, like Ridley, I could hardly get through. I didn't get through Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
I need you, Deck. This is a bad one. The worst yet. I need the old Blade Runner.
In a sense, Blade Runner was, it was totally Ridley Scott's vision.
Because I didn't understand the script when I first read it. It was just hard for me to understand. It was science fiction, and I just couldn't relate to it when I first read it.
I'm Rachel.
Deckard.
And Ridley knew that he could take my face and make it look like a 40s face.
You're reading a magazine. You come across a full-page nude photo of a girl.
Is this testing whether I'm a replicant or a lesbian, Mr. Deckard?
My best friend in high school really loved Sean Young's character of Rachel Rosen in that film. And it didn't work for me. I didn't find her physically appealing. She had way too much of a porcelain doll look for me, and I guess I like them a little more human. But that's the point of the film, isn't it? That she is the perfect replicant. And one person, in this case, Terrell, the guy who created her, Terrell, the guy who created her, his vision of absolutely perfect beauty. I think she does the role flawlessly. It's ironic because some of the most complex acting in science fiction is playing characters of a reduced emotional response.
I didn't know if I could play. I remember lessons. I don't know if it's me or Terrell's niece.
You play beautifully.
And that's one of the things about the character which was so interesting, which was she was such an emotional, android. The thing is, if I have feelings, whether or not I'm an android or not, does that mean that, is there really a moral right to kill me, even though I'm manufactured? I still am essentially human.
Would you come after me? Hunt me?
Well, he's a sexy guy because he's manly. You know what I mean? He's like a man's man. He's not like a lot of actors in Hollywood who are kind of, skinny and cool and smoke Marlboro Lights. You know what I mean? It's like, you know.
Just answer the questions, please.
Probably could have been a little more generous with me, but, you know, I've forgiven him because I'm older now. I was pretty needy. You know, at 20, I was pretty needy. I could have probably used a little more, you know, handled like a little puppy dog kind of thing, you know what I mean? So I probably exhausted his patience a little bit.
He's very nuanced and subtle, and it's not something you normally associate with science fiction.
Really got Harrison Ford out of that whole Star Wars bubblegum thing that he might have been trapped in. I'd like to think that Harrison Ford would have fought that, but it somehow matured or legitimized him because it was a real gritty portrayal.
You know, Harrison had worked with Lucas, he had worked with Spielberg, and he had worked with major talents. You know, there was a lot of tension between the way that Harrison worked and the way that Ridley worked, and at times it confronted one another, as it did with all of us. We brought to the table a very strong commitment to cultural dynamic in the year 2019.
Monsieur,
I never really spoke a language that was understandable by the normal monolinguistic person. You had to be multi-linguistic in order to understand the things that I was talking.
He say you Blade Runner.
We ended up calling it City Speak, which is what it is. It's just a combination of different dialects and different languages all put into one. And that was how we got the character. He allowed me to do that.
They jumped the shuttle off world, killed the crew and passengers.
I get a call that Ridley wants to loop dialogue that's not right or something. I go in there and Ridley's there, and he said, I want to take it down. And I said, what? He said, remember we talked about could you lower your voice? Which was like 8 months before, a year before. And I said, gee, yeah, oh, yeah. And he said, well, so we took my whole performance and lowered it. And if I said, look at Deckard, if you're not a cop, you're little people. Look at Deckard, if you're not a cop. Because there's emphysema, there's, you know, the air and the whole thing. He wanted out down here.
You're not cop, you're little people.
And I'm thinking, geez, you know, Ridley Scott didn't like one thing I did. You know, the paranoia that actors will create, you know, that whole thing. But that was a movie. The movie was very, very difficult. I'm sure anybody that worked on it will tell you stories of the same kind.
Excuse me, Miss Salome, can I talk to you for a minute? I'm from the American Federation of Variety Artists.
No, I don't think anybody was really looking at the snake, to be honest with you. I mean, I was in 3 pieces of fabric, so I hope they weren't looking at the snake that much.
I'm from the Confidential Committee on Moral Abuses.
Committee of Moral Abuses?
At first I was very uncomfortable, as I think anybody would be stripping down for the first time.
Nothing about it.
Have you felt yourself to be exploited in any way?
How do you mean exploited?
The truth of it is that it took hours to put that makeup on, because each of those sequins, which was a fish scale, they were all glued to me. Then we did days and days of, since Ridley was so methodical, we did days of that.
Are you for real?
Oh, yeah.
I think he just liked looking at a bunch of women running around in tiny patches, but anyway.
Well, you'd be surprised what a guy would go through to get a glimpse of a beautiful body.
She's fabulous in Blade Runner. I've always found her a more interesting, subtle, and complex, and just as sexy and beautiful an actress as Daryl Hannah, who you usually think of as being, you know, the sex object.
What you doing? How do I look?
You look better.
Just better?
Well, you look beautiful.
William Sanderson is absolutely brilliant in Blade Runner, and he's the most human performance in that film. He's got this incredible smile, a twinkle in his eye throughout the film. It really is, in that stark background, an incredibly appealing performance.
Since I'm not a genetic engineer and I'm not a genius, was it Ridley's inside joke? Why did he cast me?
What's your problem?
Methuselah syndrome.
What's that?
My glands, they grow old too fast.
The makeup, they did great, you know. I mean, he was supposed to be Sebastian in his 20s and look late 40s. Now I don't need any makeup.
But Sanderson, you know, Sanderson's he's a good actor. He's well-trained. I think he's from North Carolina or something. But he's a well-trained actor.
You might realize I'm not going to win any beauty contests, but I have a great heart.
He's a little spooky. He's not straight on. He's a little off the edge, but he's a nice guy.
The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and you have burned so very, very brightly, Roy.
And Rutger was a classic example. Rutger Hauer in the film. I mean, great character. Like finally realizing that they wanted to have the same lifespan as a human, not to be programmed to stop.
Not very sporting to fire on an unarmed opponent. I thought you were supposed to be good. Aren't you the good man?
Blade Runner, with its central idea, is about artificial human beings. In the sense that we don't yet have artificial human beings, none of it has come true. In the sense that we have always had a tendency to dehumanize those who do the labor for us. That predates science fiction. You just have to go back and read Harriet Beecher Stowe, read Uncle Tom's Cabin, to know that we have a long history of us as a species of saying, well, if you're a laborer and I'm the one profiting from your labors, you aren't really human. They say throughout Blade Runner, you know, replicants don't really feel emotions. And the whole test that Deckard does to determine whether somebody is a replicant or not is to ask them a bunch of questions that are supposed to elicit an empathetic response. If you can empathize with another person's humanity, you are therefore de facto human. And if you fail to do so, you're not human.
Describe in single words only the good things that come into your mind about your mother.
Well, it goes right back to the slave dealers who used to take babies out of the hands of black mothers on the plantations. And the mothers would cry, and the slave owners would turn and say, with a perfectly straight face to the slave buyer who was buying the baby, oh, don't worry, they don't feel emotions the way we do.
Let me tell you about my mother.
By dressing it up in a science fictional cloak, we're able to deal with issues. So whether or not Blade Runner comes true isn't what the film is about. The film is about how we have to be human beings conducting ourselves in an emotionally empathetic fashion.
Ridley had in mind that when Zora died, she would be very sympathetic. The actual last few seconds of time when you see Zora, when he turns me over, I let that tear come down my face, which made her more human. I wanted the audience to have enormous empathy with her. Science fiction is so telling in so many ways, and it's very interesting to see people, I mean, as actors observe people, how people slide in and out of being drone-like, machine-like, and then showing their sides of humanity.
Whether you're fully human, what does that mean? Can love exist in this kind of atmosphere? I was really, really transported by that film, and I could be 100% wrong about this, but at the time, I don't think there was anything else that had even come close.
And the constant rain, this has become another horrid cliche of film. I mean, there are some movies, like Seven, there's another movie where it just rains all the time. And in Blade Runner, you could sort of figure that there was some sort of ecological reason for that, like there was no ozone. And it certainly made all the neon stuff look really cool because it shimmered. But,
I think it was always planned to be a noir type of film, like, you know, 40s looking kind of film, only it was a modern 40s.
Blade Runner wasn't just the birth of cyberpunk in film, it was the birth period of cyberpunk. This gritty future where people in the underclasses of society really pull all the strings. Ridley Scott gave us that, and we as writers went, including William Gibson, went and ran with it after a filmmaker had made that new trope for science fiction.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave.
I always thought that going in that picture would be an exceptional picture. I thought the look of the picture, when I started to see the first dailies and so forth, I said, I've never seen anything like that on a screen.
And the artistic design, the thought put into production value, the understanding of the depth in which Ridley Scott was diving into his creative juices was apparent.
He's a stickler for meticulous mechanical detail, believable detail. And I suppose I was picked to do the design for the vehicles and some of the other ideas because of my industrial design background, essentially, which is to invent a believable reality at some point in the future.
And then when we got into the special effects, which in those days was like driving a Model A Ford, I mean, it took us an enormous amount of time for every special effect. You don't have what you have today with computers.
Ridley had never made a film in America at that point. I think Blade Runner was his first American movie.
There were problems with the crew, and perhaps he was used to working with a crew that worked differently.
In England, you ask somebody to do, one of the crew members to do something, and they say, yes, Gov, and they go off and they do it. And U.S. crews, you ask them to do something, and it finally gets done, but, they don't hustle as fast.
You could just feel it. You could feel the tension because the actors were tired and overworked, the crew was overworked, the producers wanted to get the movie finished. Ridley, being the perfectionist that he is, wanted to do it perfectly and wanted it to he wanted his vision complete.
One of the things that happened was that the crew members printed up T-shirts that said Will Rogers never met Ridley Scott, because Will was always known for saying, I never met a man I didn't like. So
I walked on the set and everybody was wearing them. And on the front it said, yes, Gov. And as you turn around and you walked away, it said, my ass. And so that was the...
But all of a sudden that picture started to go over budget a lot.
Ridley was very much a perfectionist, and he would not shoot until he was totally happy. And money was going away.
When my character first shows up, it's in that pyramid. We had water. It looked like water was floating on the sides of the little pyramid thing.
Do you like our owl?
And we had to always make sure to get that right. And Ridley was like insane about that. He would always make sure things would be moved just so that the little thing would be going like that right at the time as you walked in.
We began to recognize in them a strange obsession.
And basically, you end up in the middle of you get this snowball that you think you're controlling. It's out of control, and it just, in movies at some point, there's a point of no return.
You can't do 28 takes, and you can't print 17 takes. We're just going way beyond. So that became a point of friction to us, to be very honest with you. And I went to Warner and said, I think we got to replace Ridley Scott. Well, they panicked.
That's the spirit!
And they had the cast and crew screening for Blade Runner, after people had worked on it for months, in this terrible condition and all this stuff. And no one knew what was going on except Ridley's vision. And normally at the end of one of these screenings, they'd go crazy. Ah, yeah! The whole thing, or somebody will come on screen or something. And they sat and watched Blade Runner, which has to be a couple hours, I suppose. And you watched it, and it ended, and people just kind of sat there. They didn't know whether to applaud or what. There was just a strangeness. We didn't know what we had.
And I finally said to Ridley, I'm going to take the picture over. I want to cut it. And that got into a big thing, needless to say. There were huge things that I took out of it. Start off with, they don't understand it, which is where the narrations came in.
They don't advertise for killers in a newspaper. That was my profession. Ex-cop. Ex-Blade Runner. Ex-killer.
Much to my shock and surprise, I was interviewing Terry Jones, formerly of Monty Python, the naked guy on the piano. That probably most people remember him. A brilliant Chaucer scholar and writer, and he wrote or co-wrote the narration, which was tacked on after the fact, which of course ruined the movie.
Sushi, that's what my ex-wife called me. Cold fish.
What didn't ruin the movie? It was still a great movie, but it was just stupid.
And in the original theatrical cut, there's a tacked-on happy ending. Literally, the two main characters going off in the sunset together, literally into the sunset.
Gaff had been there and let her live. 4 years, he figured. He was wrong. Tyrell had told me Rachel was special, no termination date. I didn't know how long we'd have together. Who does?
And it just doesn't work. It defeats what the film was about. It's heavy-handed.
Oh yeah, I like the original one by far.
They ruined it. They ruined it, those bastards.
You can take or leave, at least it gives you an ending.
So when I saw it, I thought, this is lame. This is a complex, sophisticated story, and yet they're treating me like I'm an idiot who can't understand a complex, sophisticated story.
And at the time it came out, it was a shock that it wasn't a major blockbuster success in the U.S. It was in the rest of the world, but not in the United States.
Of course, then it went out, and it did not do enormous business when it came out. I mean, it has become a cult thing.
Well, flash forward a decade, and Ridley Scott recuts the film, gets rid of the gratuitous happy ending, throws out the ridiculous narration, and trusts the audience to follow what's going on. The director's cut is a masterpiece and a film that rewards repeated viewing.
And of course, the ending of the movie is based on Gaff leaving the unicorn at the base of the elevator to share with Decker the fact that he was a replicant also.
Was Decker a replicant?
You know, I don't know, because it's not like Ridley would tell me what he was telling Harrison.
I don't know.
You're a dedicated man. Try me.
One wonders whether there's ever going to be another film with the influence, the impact of a Blade Runner on the science fiction genre.
But really, in terms of the envisioning of the future, I mean, that set the tone for everything that was to follow. And now reality. It's interesting, you drive up Yonge Street in downtown Toronto and you see these big pixel boards, and it's just like this far away from the big dirigible with the Japanese woman advertising. But who knew they'd be so right?
You got all these people, massive amounts of crowd and cars and stuff like that. I mean, that's certainly pretty accurate.
There's no question to me that Ridley's world is coming true. It's so evidenced everywhere you go now. The billboards are getting bigger. The streets are getting colder. People are getting more and more removed from one another.
Is that frightening?
I don't want to answer that.